Good morning. Chum Riab Suo, people from Cambodia. Apa kabar, people from Indonesia. Magadang Umaga, people from the Philippines. I know the representation is more, but these are the friends I met over our dating. Taught me how to greet people in these different languages. And habari yenu from Kenya. My name is Faith Wanjiko, and I'm honored to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to see everyone. I'm a bit nervous because when you see many people's faces, I hope there's a doctor here in case I faint. Yeah, and I'm so happy to be here. My name is Mariam Awori. I work with Faith at Azadi as the program manager. I manage the survival leadership and advocacy portfolio. And I'm so happy to be here. It's not every day that you get a chance to sit in front of people that are passionate about this anti-trafficking sector and building a movement. So we hope you enjoy our session and ask as many questions as you can.
All right. So we will go into the presentation and how we are going to do this. Mariam and I will do this together, collectively. I will mainly be speaking from the perspective of an ally. Yeah, so next slide, please. So that is it.
Yeah, okay, I'll start by speaking about Azadi. As I've mentioned, Azadi is a survivor-led organization based in Nairobi, Kenya. Azadi is a value-led organization, and the goal is to create spaces and programs that enhance the agency of survivors of trafficking, support recovery from trauma, and sustain their integration into society. So what we are doing actually is bring the bridge between direct service provision and long-term capacity support, because we realized when survivors were integrating back into the community, it's very hard to find the support that will enable long-term reintegration. So Azadi is we focus on provision of long-term support that is sustainable for survivors that, as I've mentioned, lack community support when they're integrating back into the society. And that's a brief about Azadi. We also have a physical space, which is the resource center where survivors come and access the services that we offer. And we have our flyers at the outside table there. I will be very happy for people to go and just read more about our work. And you can always ask us questions about the work that we do.
All right. So as part of our feminist practice, we acknowledge our debt to those whose shoulders we stand on, to those who helped us find our way, and to those who taught us what we know now. We acknowledge that we are not all-knowing, and we are continuously learning from one another. So the knowledge presented here today is as a result of learnings from our work in different organizations. We are also grateful for Azadi community, which has challenged our past ideologies and been a place for continuous learning and unlearning. A special mention to Azadi, as I said, to the National Survivor Network, to the GFEMs for continuously documenting their work in meaningful engagement.
Okay, I will first, next slide, please. I want to talk about the definition of meaningful engagement. And the brief definition of meaningful engagement can be to make sure that people who have been impacted by the issues are involved both in developing, implementing, and evaluating the effectiveness of the strategies that you put across. Because most of the time, when you are looking at it as a perspective of someone who knows what someone has been through without having been there yourself, then you may not even know if your strategies are working. So wanting to work with impacted communities is to engage them meaningfully. And today we're just going to look at what are some of the barriers that can come up when you're trying to engage meaningfully with impacted communities.
So before we get into the barriers, let us look at some assumptions that we have about inclusion of people with lived experience. So the first assumption is that this is something that only allies need to think about. That is not the truth. Allies and survivors need to work together in order to meaningfully engage impacted communities.
Yeah, and I'd like to give an example of how that can look like. Because when you leave that responsibility exclusively for allies, then we forget to take into account the responsibility that also people with lived experience have to play in inclusion. So for example, you might find that the survivors of different forms of trafficking, there's sex trafficking, there's labor trafficking, there's domestic servitude, and sometimes you might find like a survivors of a specific group. For example, survivors of sex trafficking may seem to be like more, I'm putting this in quotes, like there are more of survivors than maybe someone who might have been through like labor trafficking, which may to some people not seem as intense as sex trafficking. So this is a point where you find that this representation from just like one group instead of having a diverse representation of everyone. So when you talk about inclusion, we need to look at all aspects, not only the responsibility of allies, because both allies and survivors have a power to play in when it comes to inclusion.
We also assume that survivor inclusion is about representation, but as Helen, I think in the first session mentioned, is that we need survivors in the room. So you'll find that survivors are brought to the table because we have seen in the recent past that there has been a lot of advocacy work and organizing around inclusion of people with lived experience. So some organizations, not all of them, bring in people with lived experience just so that they are seen as inclusive. So we need to realize that it's not only about the organization or the collective being perceived as having brought survivors into the room, but whatever contributions that people with lived experience bring needs to actually be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and also talking from a perspective of survivors, and I just want to say this, and I hope it's not even aimed to offend anyone, but being a survivor is not a job description. Just because someone is a survivor, you can't just bring someone to the table because they are a survivor. You have to bring them to the table because you want to listen to their ideas, you want to take their ideas in. For example, I want to give an example. You'll find some organizations have like a planning committee for, like, let's say for an activity like this one, it can be like another organization, and you have like survivors in the planning committee, but ideally, they are not even contributing to the planning, they're not contributing to the agenda. Like most of the time it's just to fulfill like maybe the needs of the donor. Maybe the donor needs to see there's a planning committee made up of survivors, but are you really taking into consideration the ideas they're bringing in? Are you really taking into consideration their perspectives? It's different to just have survivors on the table, but it's also a different angle when you're trying to really incorporate the feedback that they're giving. It may not always be positive feedback, but we should be open to learning because we don't know everything. The person who has the lived experience is the expert of their own experience.
And in reality, sometimes it may not be possible to take in all the input that survivors bring to the table, maybe due to various limitations. It may be not enough funding for implementation of certain ideas, but it is important that if you know that you will not take in the input, to go back to survivor leaders and give this as feedback, share what the limitations are.
Yeah, and another assumption that we have is that we have shared values, definitions, and visions of what inclusion and survivor leadership should look like. And the reality is we don't, because when we look, like even for us who are in this room, we all come from different things. We all come from different beliefs. We all come from different experiences, and assuming that we are all starting in the common ground will be pretending. You just have to sit and look at, what does this person believe in that I don't? Someone else might be uncomfortable being called a certain type of name. Like, for example, some people say victims, but another person might say, no, me, I don't see myself as a victim, I'm a survivor. Another person will say, I don't want to be called a survivor, I'm a person who lived the experience. Being open to that, sometimes you'll also recognize that you might be speaking something that you think is correct, but to the other person, that is not how they look at things. So it's just being open and being open to learn about what the other person believes in, so that we are able to, it's like sharing with each other the knowledge that we have. Yeah.
Sometimes we also assume that having people who work with impacted populations in the room is as good as having people with lived experience in the room. That is not correct. This is assuming that having caregivers or having people like social workers in this room who work with impacted communities is having the voices of impacted communities in the room. And that can be misleading. So we recognize, and we are not saying that allies should not be in the room. What we are saying is that the perspective that we bring, the perspective that impacted communities bring and allies bring, those two different perspectives are needed in order to make meaningful change and in order to really engage people with lived experience.
Yeah. Okay, another assumption is inviting survivors to tell their stories. It's engagement, and it's also a leadership experience. And this is something that has been happening for the longest time. And as I mentioned earlier, being a survivor is not a job description. And these organizations have changed inviting survivors to tell their stories as a work or consultancy opportunity. You find survivors being invited to media stations to share their stories, survivors being invited to various platforms to share their stories. But then again, is that really work? How will that impact them in their future? For example, if I stand here and I start telling my story, I'm not properly trained. I don't even know what do I want to share to people, because these are something that people will know me for. And we just want to mention in this room that survivors are more than their stories. Survivors can be many things. I can be a survivor, but I'm also a mental health practitioner. Yeah, so my story or someone else's story should not define them. And I just want to define what inclusion is. The next slide. So inclusion is the proactive and continuous practice of creating a context where people are embraced in their full and complex identities, and they are given access to engagement as possible and treated with dignity and respect. I want to emphasize with dignity and respect. And when you treat someone with dignity, all of us in this room expect to be treated with dignity. Being treated with dignity is identifying a person as a whole. A person might have been through trauma, but the trauma stories does not define who the person is.
So at its core, inclusion is about sharing power with the aim of creating an environment where all our identities influence outcome in that environment. So we are going to go into looking at barriers of meaningful inclusion. And barriers may come from different places. They may come from a place of fear and may require letting go of perfectionism and committing to repair. I'll give an example. We recently, just this year, had a conversation with Azadi staff members around succession. This has always been one of our founding principles, that people with lived experience would eventually take up leadership positions and possibly all staff positions within the organization. So when we started having that conversation, it really brought about fear and uncertainty because someone starts to think about, or the idea that first comes to mind is that people need to live. But when we think about the idea of a movement, we also need to remember that our roles are continuously changing and shifting. So when someone moves, or when someone, when we transition, or when we speak about succession, it is about personal growth. It is about me growing out of this position and possibly into another in the movement, so that someone else can take up my role. So we need to remember, and I think as grassroots organizations and organizations in general, we need to think about what our succession plan is from the inception of the organization, so that we don't have, we are not stagnating, and we do not remain at a point where new ideas don't come in, people are not growing within the organization. Another barrier may come from an unwillingness to let go of power and ego, and require that leadership, board, and funders learn to decenter themselves and show up with personal and professional humility. For example, there's an illusion that, or when we talk about power, we think that one person is powerless and another person is all-powerful. I will give an example of what is happening in Kenya today. And for a long time, we have seen political leaders, or we have thought of political leaders as people who are above every other person. But the activism that is happening in Kenya now has really shown us that truly power comes from the people and not only from the leadership. So when we think about power, we need to think about sharing power in a way that I share my power with you, you share my power, your power with me, and it's a continuous process. Someone talked about power with during the first session, and this is how we should be approaching it, with the mentality that when we share power, we don't lose power. Our power becomes more when we share it.
Yeah, and most of the times we have this perception that allies have more power than survivors, and the reality is we need to create more spaces for people with lived experience to identify the power that they truly hold. Because when allies, sometimes we try to show up as saviors, like the people with lived experience are very vulnerable people that need someone to save them, someone to come and help them. We need to recognize that survivors have been in situations where their powers have been taken away from them, and when this happens, this perpetuates the powerlessness and the lack of agency that they once had. So it's very important to also recognize that even though a person is a survivor, they have a power within them that we need to mold. This can be done through leadership trainings, this can be done through mentorships, and my colleague has spoken about power with. When we do this in power with, instead of looking at, because I have more resources or I have like something more than that I can offer, I'm more powerful than someone who doesn't have. And we just want to look at some of the common barriers that can increase overall levels of engagement and some opportunities to potentially address these barriers. And one of the barriers, I think next slide, one of the barriers is people with lived experience may not know if they could do the job. And this may become as a worry of what is listed in the job descriptions. For example, when you are advertising for an opportunity and you want survivors to apply for that opportunity, there's a way the description may be written that may look, someone may see it and see they're not qualified enough to do that job. And one of the opportunities to overcome these barriers may be the job descriptions may be well written with different sections, ensuring that there's a clear language, that's accessible, appropriate language. For example, the job description can have a section of, like, these are the required qualities, but there's also the possibility of willing to learn, and there can be a section of you don't need to have all the required qualities for you to qualify. Because if you look at most of the work that we do as non-profits, this is work that can be taught to people. But when we limit the job descriptions with certain brackets, then it becomes very difficult for someone to see the potential that they have and apply. And also having information sessions. For example, I want to give an example of something that happened at our organization. We had a training on beadwork and leatherwork training, and we sent out that call for application. And when we looked at the number of people that had applied, they were not we didn't reach the number that we wanted, and we decided to do an information session. And the reality is that many people thought it was a very complex thing. But when you have an info session and you break down and answer the questions that the members have, then many people then applied in return. This means that having information session is very important because you are able to break down the pieces that may seem very hard for people to understand. And also the hiring process can include letting participants know the information the organization may need for the process. For example, what does your hiring process look like for your organization? Because we all come from different organizations, and you don't expect all hiring processes to look the same. You can include something like, you can evaluate the work experience that people had that is not formal. I may not have studied movement leadership, but I've been in places that have enabled me to learn about movement leadership. So when you look at the informal work that I have done, then you might find that I'm very qualified for that job. And also, if someone's job application is rejected, we know sometimes you can try all this, but you don't find the qualities that you need in a person. It's just good to write back and explain how the process looked like and why they were not selected, so that maybe next time when they try, they're able to know what they missed and they're able to incorporate it in their application process.
Another barrier may be around concerns about the organizational culture. So people with lived experience may worry that they will feel or they will be treated like outsiders, or they will not really integrate in an organization that may not be very diverse. They may also fear that they'll be tokenized, because we have seen this as a practice in the past many times. And Mariam had mentioned earlier that organizations have thought of inclusion as having people with lived experience come, share their stories, sit on panels, share their experiences. So there may be that fear, and there may also be the fear that the support from staff, they will not get support from staff who do not have lived experience. Organizations, on the other hand, may also fear failure. So you may be asking yourself, what if we mess up? What if we leave the person with lived experience more traumatized and angry? And these are all valid fears. However, there are opportunities in which we can overcome this as a barrier. So one of the ways is that we need to translate organizational values into ways in which they can be lived out practically, and have continuous conversations within the team on how to ensure that the organization is living out their values. I'll give an example of Azadi's approach to safeguarding. So our approach is mainly on focusing on well-being first. So we ensure that each person who is working within the organization, they are at a point where everyone is well. And this is not done by wishful thinking. It's done by ensuring that the support services that are there within the organization are accessible to each person, and also recognizing that each person has trauma. People with lived experience, those who do not have lived experience of human trafficking, also have some form of trauma, and ensuring that there are services available and accessible to each person within the organization. Another opportunity is in public communication, so ensuring that the work you're doing to be inclusive is well put in your channels. This can be in your website, in your social media pages. So ensuring that you communicate where you stand when it comes to lived experience engagement. Then internship and learning placements. Consider having paid internships for people with lived experience. Days have passed. This is no longer the time to tell people that we are paying you by you getting your experience. Yeah. We also need to recognize that when this person is there, even during the internship, there's expertise that they're bringing, there's manpower that they're bringing. So we also need to put aside a budget to ensure that the person is also supported to be there. You know, I will not come to intern in your organization and I don't have food at the end of the day, you know. So let's also consider having that. So for new hires, also ensure that all staff onboarding includes education and mentoring about what lived experience-centric workplace involves and how to be a good colleague to other people with lived experience. Set up opportunities to learn from new and continuous staff what is important to them in the workplace so that they can model care.
Yeah. Next slide. Okay, the other barrier is cultural differences, colonialism. English is not my first language, non-profit and funding power dynamics. And when we look, the reality is when you look at many non-profits, was started by and continue to give decision-making power to people who do not have lived experience of the challenges these non-profits address. So for example, these are people who do not come from the same regions or communities where they do bulk of their work. It's a good thing when people come in and they intentionally want to help, but also this can lead to lack of organizational inclusion of the people who know the problems and are close to those solutions, or a lack of awareness of the variance in how different regions frame trauma and support healing. Because like when you look at where you come from, for example, me, I come from Kenya, and how we talk about trauma and how we talk about healing and recovery might be different from a person who may come from the US or maybe from UK. So when you come to Kenya and you want to implement strategies that you've learned in your country, maybe you've learned here in Indonesia, that may not work if you don't involve the people that are in Kenya. Yeah, and when we look at even regions, power dynamics from impulsive system can lead to paternalism in anti-trafficking strategies. And when you look at the history, my friend Helen was talking here about colonialism. When you look at the colonial intervention, the power dynamic like really puts potential for paternalism and significantly increased the dependency that people wanted, like the savior syndrome that I've been talking about. You can't come there as a person with power and wanting to help people, because if even the people that have impacted by an issue, they also have the power that they hold. And that's when you come and practice paternalism, you start treating them like children who need care. And ideally, they have the solutions. It's just that you need to come in and make them see that these solutions, you also have them within you.
So just an emphasis. So if you come to a place, or if you show up somewhere with the mentality that people need saving, as Mariam has said, or that your culture is more superior, or that your knowledge is better, anytime you come with that mentality, that you're bringing something better than other people can offer, this is having a colonial mentality. So we need to show up with humility, with recognition that, as I said when we were starting, that we do not know everything. And it was also said here in the morning that we are not better, we are just different. Yeah? So let's always remember to show up with humility. So what opportunities are there to overcome this barrier? So we need to look at internal organizational priorities. So prioritize intentional people-first relationship building. This includes your leadership, staff, funders, board members, stakeholders, partners, and participants. Have diverse board members, but work on creating a safer, braver space so that participation can be equitable and meaningful, which may require mentoring board members on power dynamics, privilege, and positionality. So we are also not showing up with the mentality that board members know everything. Yeah? We also recognize that there are areas that we may also need to share knowledge or teach when it comes to aspects of power dynamics and privilege. Another opportunity is in partnerships. So build relationships with people doing grassroots work on the ground in the region or populations you plan with. As I have also mentioned, maintain humility about Western frameworks of healing. Mariam has said, our perspectives on healing may be different. So we need to maintain humility in all areas.
Yeah. Another barrier, which is in the next slide, is funding norms and donors' positionality and expectations. We are, like most of us who are here, are running organizations that we depend on donors for funding. And we all know sometimes it's very hard to practice survivor inclusion as well as achieve what your donor requires from you. So the distance between funders and impacted people is often a barrier in increasing meaningful engagement. You, as the person that is working on the ground, are very close to the people that are impacted and see more insight to the effective solutions. But sometimes we understand that we have funders that are very good, but sometimes funders may not prioritize the programs that you think are important based on their own assessment of what is important and urgency, rather than what can be long-term for the impacted communities. And additionally, the assessment do not often consider the cultural differences in priorities and needs. And outside assessment of urgency often lead to not addressing the root causes, because you see it as a perspective of an outsider, that's someone who is working on the ground. And emphasis on the numbers. You know, sometimes when you receive funding, you have to reach like a target number, and it's very hard to be impactful when you just look at achieving. Maybe I need to cover 100, I need to cover 200, but you can also cover 20 and be impactful. But your donor may see it as you're not reaching the targets that you had set. And this, it minimalizes the impactfulness of interventions that may be higher quality, because when you engage fewer people, we can all agree, then the quality will be better than when you engage more people, because you will spend more money, more time, and when you put more resources into something that is little, then it comes out with bigger results. Some of the opportunities for these barriers may be donor selections. Sometimes you might identify donors and build relationship with donors who align with the organization approach of funding norms and engagement of people with lived experience. You find that some donors are very open-minded and they just want to hear from you what you think will work best for you. So make relationships with those donors so that you are able to practice meaningful engagement. And also, donor engagement. Ensure that the donors have the opportunity to talk to program staff all levels of the organization hierarchy to understand the broader vision of the day-to-day work. For example, you are the executive director or the CEO, and you're the only person that is talking to the donor. But in reality, the programs people, they're the ones that are working on the ground. If the donors come and talk to the programs people or the people that you serve or your clients, then they may know from them what they really need. Because even you, as you talk, you may miss some points that is very important when the donor comes directly to talk to the people that are impacted. And another thing that we do as Azadi is ethical storytelling. I will just mention it here, but if you want to know more, we are here, me and my colleague Faith. So ethical storytelling is to create compelling stories about how funding focused on relationship building, capacity building, and lived experience can transform local organizations, and what sharing power with lived experience can do. And this makes out for more effective, but this makes our work more effective by increasing our capacity to create lived experience-centered solutions. So ethical storytelling means it's not the normal way that we know someone comes and just tells their story. Stories can be told in different ways. I walked outside there and there's very powerful, like clothes are made with different fabrics, and when you look at it, someone that was making that was very intentional with what they were doing. So stories can be told in different forms. And when I'm sure all of us, when we went outside there, we wanted to buy everything. It's just that we can't go home with everything. So creating stories that really show how your work is very important. Many donors can also buy into the work that you do.
Leadership buy-in and evaluation of challenges. So often there's a lack of dedicated resources for visions we are trying to implement, and we may experience challenges when leadership are not fully aligned or bought in to the changes that are necessary to increase meaningful engagement of people with lived experience. So when this happens, it can increase emotional labor expected of participants, consultants, and staff with lived experience of human trafficking. So you may go to an organization and find that 2 staff members are really doing a good job and are really trying their best to ensure that survivors are included. But the management, for example, the board is not making efforts or are not fully in support of this, then it becomes very, people can only push for so long. So you may even find that the 2 staff members who are really doing the work in ensuring that people with lived experience are engaged, get emotionally tired, or even exit the organization and go look for places where the culture allows for that to be done. So the culture of an organization cannot also change unless this is led from management. The 2 staff members already have the system against them. And if people who have ultimate decision-making power have not been bought in, then it becomes close to impossible to break down and overturn existing systems that do not encourage lived experience engagement. Some of the opportunities to overcome these barriers may be addressing funding concerns. So have strong, concrete monitoring and evaluation of internal processes to ensure and demonstrate that your organization is careful with funding and sometimes with unrestricted funding. And for donors, also having a move towards unrestricted funding. And we realize that it is essential, for people to have built relationships in order to trust with giving unrestricted funding. When this happens, it shifts the burden of accountability, and it requires having adequate guidelines from the organizations and transparency in place. We also need to evaluate success of efforts, so evaluate processes as well as impact and outcomes, and include lived experience engagement process in your evaluation. Board engagement, work towards a shift from top-down to bottom-up leadership. Find ways for the board to engage beyond the leadership team with opportunity to interact with organizations, partners, and staff doing the work.
Next slide, please. Okay, making barriers explicit. I want to talk about that part. How do we make barriers explicit? Next slide. So when you look at empowering versus tokenizing, empowering means you are hiring someone for their skills and for the knowledge that you know they have. And tokenizing means you are hiring someone for their trauma story. And I've said, I think I've repeatedly said it, being a survivor is not a job description. So when you're hiring someone and you want to empower them, they may not have all the skills, as most of us. When you apply for a job, it's not because you qualify 100% that you have everything that is needed. But there's room for education, there's room for mentorship, there's room for training. So when you want to empower to hire someone, and you want to empower them, you have to hire them for their skills, and you have to be willing to put in the work to make them, we've all talked about here, making leadership positions for survival leaders. And this is the way that we can make leadership positions for survival leaders. Being open to mentorship, being open to doing leadership trainings, being open to offering educational opportunities if you're a donor, rather than just hiring them for the trauma story, because that will even be worse, because you are setting that person up for failure. That person may not be able to do the work that it is intended, the work that they're supposed to do, because then they're not equipped with the resources that they need to be able to overcome the trauma that they have experienced.
Next slide, please. So when we think about sustainability, we also, first of all, there should be accessibility, right? And in order for us to meaningfully engage people with lived experience, and for example, within organizations, we recognize that professional development is required. So from an organizational perspective, as the managing director, I'm possibly maybe here, I also am here to think about, are we working towards the mission of the organization, right? So there is a balance there that is required between, we need to ensure that professional development is there, and we also need to think about, are we getting the time to train and the time to do the work? Then in accessibility, we also need to think about extended time for extended onboarding is required. And this is not only for people with lived experience. I also think that even people without lived experience of human trafficking may come in an organization and require extended onboarding. For sustainability, we may do all these things, ensure there's professional development, extended onboarding, ensure there's professionalism and education not to exclude. But if the organizational culture has not changed and the systems have remained the same, then it is going to be very difficult to sustain whatever you have been able to create.
Okay. Also, I want to talk about trauma-informed versus being accountable. Faith has talked in the beginning, when you talked about trauma-informed, we don't mean being trauma-informed to people who have lived experience only, because people have experienced traumas in different forms throughout the course of their lives. Someone has lost a child, someone has lost a parent, someone has lost a sister, someone has even lost a pet that they were very attached to. So when you talk about trauma-informed, we understand we should be able to offer support to your staff members, to the people that you are working with. But also, trauma-informed does not mean people should not be accountable. Being trauma-informed does not mean that everything should slide. Because sometimes when you let everything slide, because you are being trauma-informed or because this someone has some trauma, then you are not setting that person up for success. You need to identify the gap that is there between being trauma-informed and also being accountable. And I just wanted, the next slide, please. I want to talk about this. Survivors can be many things. They can be brilliant, they can be ill-informed, they can be right about some things, they can be wrong about some things, they can be empathetic, they can be horrible people, they can be victims, they can be perpetrators, they can be hard workers, they can be bad employees, they can be someone who makes mistakes, they can be complex, and this is because they're just like everybody else. I've been in rooms where when people are talking about survivors, it's like you're excluding yourself from those experiences. Because you have, all these things everybody has. Sometimes we are good, sometimes we are bad, sometimes we are ill-informed. And Faith mentioned something about you are not the best, because we are all here to learn. Yeah, thank you. So we're just like everybody else, and we need to honor the full humanity of survivors.
So, we will not wake up tomorrow morning after having this talk, and in our organizations, we have meaningfully engaged survivors, right? Just because of what we know. We are not making instant coffee, okay? So, we need to ask ourselves whether we are continually growing and making change in a way that we are going to continue to do it. So, for any change to happen within organizations, we need to think 5 years out. For systems to change, we need to think 20 years out. For the world to change, we'll probably be dead, but something that you did today will have contributed to it. We need to think 5 generations out. And recognize that it's the steps and the things that we do every day that will lead to the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Okay.
Chris, do you have questions?
Yes, you do. When opening a job opportunity that we would like to encourage survivors to apply to, is it appropriate to ask candidates to disclose whether they are survivors or not? In other words, how to balance the desire to have survivors apply for a job and the need to respect a survivor's decision not to identify as such?
Yeah, I think that question comes with an answer. Sometimes we respect that someone may not be comfortable enough to come and say that I'm a survivor of this form of slavery, because we understand that people are at different levels of healing, and sometimes it's just uncomfortable for someone to come out. If someone is willing to share that they're a survivor, it has to come from them, because if you say you must tell us that you're a survivor, then, because you're in a vulnerable position, you may not be ready, but you'll just say because you want to get that job. So just put it out there that it's not a must you can be employed, but it's not a must for you to come into the job and tell everyone that I'm a survivor. You can keep that until the time when you are ready.
Thank you. What does ethical storytelling look like, and can you give some advice or steps to ensure we are telling stories in an ethical way?
Okay. That would probably need another whole session.
Yeah.
But ethical storytelling is basically ensuring that we think about who is telling the story, who has written the story, who tells the story, who writes the story, who shares the story, yeah, and ensuring that whatever is shared in a way that is dignifying and does not leave the person or someone sharing their story does not leave them in a position where they feel exposed and undignified, in a nutshell. But we can have a session in next year's ARAT or in a GLC session.
Invite us.
How should power dynamics be addressed in order to empower survivor engagement when the socio-cultural setting is a top-down approach and relatively conservative?
Okay, I will talk about our approach, because I think it's working for us. Maybe it may not work for somebody else, but I'll just talk about the approach that we do. For power dynamics, for example, like Faith is the managing director, but when you come to Azadi, you wouldn't even know who the managing director is, because we work together. You can be working together. Working together does not, I also mentioned, does not mean there is no accountability. But everybody is involved in decision making. You might come to a place where if you ask one staff member about a project that they do, they don't even have an idea if that project exists, because some information has been like it's very limited for everybody to access. So power dynamics can be reduced by trying to work together, because Sophie, who is here, has been mentoring us and teaching us about community. And what does a community do? You look at everyone's perspective as very important. You form a community because everyone brings the different things that they have, the different contributions that they have to the table. And when you are in a community, it's very hard to say this person has more power than this person, because everyone's responsibilities is well taken off by the community.
Just to add on, let me just add on to what Mariam is speaking about, and also recognizing that I think I mentioned that power does not solely belong to one person.
Yeah.
As the managing director of Azadi, there's a whole membership of amazing women. And if they decide today to wake up and organize for me to leave Azadi, I will leave Azadi.
You will.
Yeah. So we need to also, each person within an organization, to identify the power that we all hold and then bring that power together. Yeah. So we are not, we are not living in an illusion or a bubble that there's no power or people don't have power. We just recognize that each person has some form of power that they bring.
What are your thoughts on leadership opportunities for the next generation, particularly those who are survivors? What are effective ways for the current generation to support them in becoming future leaders?
Okay, leadership opportunities for survivors. I'm even happy that we have conferences like this, that we can come and sit and talk about these issues, because we don't know everything. And when we come together, we learn and we see about the potential ways that we can make leadership opportunities better. And in order for survivors to have leadership opportunities, there's many things that need to be done. There needs to be training, there needs to be education, there needs to be mentorship. And people like us who are in this room, we have some, like Faith has mentioned, we all have power. We have power to be able to actualize that. And if you impact a group of survivors, like all of us in organizations, we work with survivors. If you impact a group of survivors, they can forward that knowledge to the next generation. And when you look 10 years from now, if we continue doing the work that we work with empowerment and training and mentorship, it will be a different story. We will not be coming here and still continue talking about survivor inclusion, because we'll be having survivors in decision-making tables, we'll be having survivors in different positions in the anti-trafficking sector.
We probably have time for one more question. Mariam, how would you say your background in psychology has helped you in this work?
Yeah, okay. My background in psychology has helped me a lot, because in the work that I do, I manage the membership of Azadi. As you know, it can be very hard to deal with, because at such now we have 124 members. My background in psychology has enabled me to have the patience, first of all, because we are here talking about working with survivors. It's not always easy, and sometimes you might find yourself feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, and it's okay. We are not Superman. Superman is a myth. So sometimes it's just good to look at yourself and check. One of our values is prioritizing rest. And check yourself and see, am I working beyond what my body can hold? And step back and take a rest. We know we want to make a difference. We know we want to make survivors to be in leadership positions. We know we are in this room because we are very passionate about this work, but take a break and take care of yourself. You can't help anyone if you have your mental health or your health is not good.
And finally, Azadi has a consultancy, and we are happy to work with and to offer technical assistance to organizations on the area of meaningful engagement of people with lived experience. We are here for the next 3 days. We'll share our contacts. And Mariam also mentioned that there are flyers out there. So thank you very much. Our time is up.
Thank you so much.